PlayStation 3 was meant to be huge, not only in gaming, but even in the entertainment space. With its great hardware potential, built-in Blu-ray player, and pre-existing success in both sectors, Sony became extremely arrogant. This arrogance likely led to many of the bad choices that they made prior to the launch of the PlayStation 3 and many other decisions that came later on. Needless to say, the PlayStation was not the top dog of the 7th gen of gaming that everyone expected it to be, with it sitting behind the Wii in terms of raw sales and barely surpassing the Xbox 360, a direct and still fresh competitor in the scene. Now, Sony sought to rectify the mistakes of their 7th generation console with a system that did almost everything very differently. This was a powerful console with a very different form factor and many decisions that led it to dominate for a great portion of the 8th generation of gaming, and one that corrected the chaos from its predecessor. This is the PlayStation 4, Sony's uncontested comeback story in the hardware space. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. The Switch 2 has been out for almost a year, and we've seen a surprising amount of accessories for it out on the market, but nothing quite as nice as what JSAUX is making. I have two case types for the Nintendo Switch 2, with the first one being a clear plastic shell with grips for your Joy-Con, which are so comfortable. There's even this jet black case with a screen protector that remains low profile and offers even greater support for your hands with these extended grips. And both can be docked really nicely too, even when attached. But to top it all off, the Omni Central Charger Dock is a much more portable solution for hooking up your Switch to your TV and offers an all-in-one solution for this, and even doubles as a normal charger if need be. Get everything shown through the links in the description, and special thanks to JSAUX for sponsoring this video. Everyone already knows the story of the PlayStation 3. This was a console that launched at an extremely high price at that time, with some of the most tone-deaf statements from Sony surrounding it that gaming has ever witnessed. The PlayStation 3 struggled for some time, particularly when it came to the hardware failures associated with the yellow light of death and the fact that games were not performing as well on the PlayStation 3 as they were on their competitor, the Xbox 360. Eventually, Sony found many ways of lowering the price of their hardware, launching multiple and cheaper revisions of the original design, but the most groundbreaking was their slim model. It was only $299 at launch. By then, Sony had a lot more games on their system and plenty of exclusives that looked and performed quite well. They eventually redeemed themselves since their original launch, but clearly, PlayStation 3 was far from being the most popular platform. Many changes needed to be made, and the successor to the PlayStation 3 could not launch at a better time. In 2012, Nintendo were actually the ones to pioneer the 8th generation of consoles with the introduction of the Wii U, a system that sparked a ton of confusion and one that was just a bit more powerful than the current 7th generation systems. This console was critically panned and it lost support from many developers quickly, as the Wii U was lagging behind in so many ways. This was all that we had on the market for some time, and so far it was quite disappointing. In February of 2013, Sony announced a platform that would be easy to develop games for, and that would be much more powerful to boot, the PlayStation 4. However, their focus was mostly on showing off what their hardware could do without an actual reveal of what their system would look like. In May of 2013, Microsoft announced the Xbox One, and it was an absolute disaster in every single way. Mandatory Connect accessory that the customer has to pay for, a terrible and complicated use games policy, the fact that it needed to connect to the internet in every certain amount of time, among that insane price tag ruined gamers' perception of Microsoft's next console. During E3 of the same year, Sony capitalized on Microsoft's blunders by calling out the fact that their system has absolutely none of the same anti-consumer features that Microsoft is forcing onto their consoles. With it came a full hardware reveal. The PlayStation 4 is actually quite small, particularly when compared to the original PlayStation 3, but even then, it is a pretty compact system. The PS4 is completely black and has this sort of layered look to it that really distinguishes it from the PlayStation 3, but it offers a lot of the same design cues that we've seen from Sony's glory days, the PlayStation 2. It mostly features a matte finish all across, with featuring the Blu-ray drive and power and eject buttons, and even two USB-A ports on the very front. There are also going to be some LEDs along the top, which separate the two finishes that you'd find on launch models. On the back, you will find a power connector, an optical audio port, an aux port, an HDMI port, and an Ethernet port. And finally, we said goodbye to any analog connections as we fully embrace embrace digital ones. Now that aux port in the back is actually meant for the PlayStation camera, an optional accessory for the PlayStation 4. Additionally, the model that you see here is very close to the original launch unit, but it's actually a newer revision that has this matte top, and some of the ports have been switched around, but everything else remains nearly identical. The PS4 was set to launch with a 500GB hard drive, which was mostly fine, at least temporarily, considering that PS3s were already being shipped with drives of the same size. But it was a traditional console through and through, with Sony emphasizing that it would be easy to play used games on it, as well as trade, sell, or borrow games from anyone without restrictions. This console didn't need to connect to the internet in order to work either. None of these features were exceptional in the slightest, however, it was the only console that still worked the way many expected it to. While the Wii U was lagging drastically behind and the Xbox One was going to be a DRM nightmare. This was obviously enough to solidify what console most gamers would favor this generation, but what really stood out about the PS4 was how capable it was going to be for gaming specifically. And to accompany their new system, they also launched a brand new controller, the DualShock 4. This controller has a lot of the same design cues that we have seen from previous DualShock controllers, however, it is genuinely the greatest upgrade we had seen to date. This controller is slightly wider than the DualShock 3, but with greatly improved grips and textured backing, making this a much more comfortable controller than its predecessor. Personally, this was something that Sony always struggled with until the DualShock 4. The buttons and the layout was mostly the same, now with much better thumbsticks that feel tighter than on any other controller of theirs, and the caps are now finally much easier to grip thanks to the new design. The previous dome caps were, in my opinion, always slippery to play with, and now even pressing L3 and R3 intentionally was far easier. Instead of the select button, we now get a share button, which is for taking screenshots, recording screen recordings, and actually sharing these things on different social media platforms. Now, the triggers were also improved, now having a more satisfying spring with great travel. But the biggest feature was the inclusion of the touchpad, which was meant to be used in certain parts of the UI and even in certain games. You will also find a micro USB port for charging and a light bar that serves multiple functions. It would switch colors in order to identify which player number you were, but it was also meant to be used with the PlayStation camera for all sorts of additional features. This controller's newest features were seldom utilized, but this one was surely catered to gamers and to finally give us a genuinely good controller. Another goal of Sony's was to make the experience of using a PlayStation 4 easy and simple. Hence, we received a very simple yet mostly effective user interface. The Xbox One's interface was pretty and flashy, but certainly annoying to navigate, while Sony's lacked a lot of flair. But it was at least easy to access everything that you would need to reach at a glance. The PlayStation 2 had a pretty nice user interface. It was much simpler, but still easy to navigate. It was acceptable and very effective for the times. The PlayStation 3 had a very clean UI that always felt modern. The PS4 has an effective one, but that's all that was really needed here. Everything is easily accessible even if it's not the best out there. The PlayStation 4 was at its core a great system, it's just not one that would have been exceptional at plain sight. Even then, the competition was absolutely awful at this time, which allowed Sony to capitalize on everyone else's failures, and within the first year, they sold roughly 14.4 million PS4s, while Microsoft went as far as to stop sharing exact sales figures, as did Nintendo. However, the success was carried on by the incredible games and development decisions for the PlayStation 4, more than any bad competition could really account for. The PlayStation 4 was created with the intention of it being easy to develop games for, especially when compared to the Cell processor from the PlayStation 3, a platform that was tough to work with, which caused a lot of early game releases to look and perform worse when compared to Xbox 360 versions of the same games. With the PS4, Sony embraced x86 instead of improving upon the Cell processor architecture. The idea was to go ahead and make development much more inviting on their platform, reducing the amount of time that it would take to get the graphics engine working properly for any given project. Now, generally, that was exactly the case. The Xbox 360 was also x86 based, and it was what helped to make it so friendly to developers, and Sony learned their lesson from the last generation very, very well here. The PlayStation 4 launched with over 25 games. The lineup was not very impressive, and games did not really look that different when compared to the generation that just ended, which is a common occurrence nowadays, as some of these were still cross-gen titles. However, already it was clear that the PlayStation 4 had a big advantage over the Xbox One, as games like Battlefield 4 looked far better and ran at higher resolutions on the PlayStation 4 when compared to Microsoft's new hardware, and aspects that was carried on for several games, particularly around this launch period. However, one game within the launch window of the PlayStation 4 that showed off its graphical prowess was infamous Second Son. While still having aspects that easily dated as an early 8th generation title, it had genuinely impressive lighting and particle effects with beautiful reflections that were genuinely worthy of noting. This was one of very many exclusive titles to the PlayStation 4, but certainly only one of many that came to this platform. One of the many exclusive titles that made a huge impact on the perception of the PS4 as a platform was The Last of Us, showcasing the genres and quality of narratives that would be told on here, while looking absolutely beautiful and capturing the hearts of so many gamers. This game was easily considered a system seller. We received amazing games like Bloodborne that were set in a very Lovecraftian-inspired setting, a game that was absolutely stunning while being one of the best Souls games ever released, and it was only seen on Sony's platform. Even then, incredibly stylistic games that strayed away from realistic graphics yet went for one of the most eye-catching aesthetics around. Persona 5 was a system seller for myself, and I'm sure many others felt the same way too. Games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which came towards the very end of the generation, were insanely popular, and even before that, Sony had Uncharted, The Lost Legacy, Ghost of Tsushima, Detroit Become Human, Spider-Man, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us Part 2, and The Shadow of the Colossus Remake, Nioh 1 and 2, Heavy Rain, Catherine Full Body, Days Gone, Disgaea 5, Alliance of Vengeance, among so many more titles. Now, some of these were just timed exclusives. The fact that they were on PlayStation 4 first was still important. The first-party support on the PlayStation 4 was absolutely astounding throughout this generation. The third-party support was very important here too, and extremely significant. One game that completely blew me away when I saw it is actually one of my favorite games in spite of any controversies behind it, which is Final Fantasy 15. A game that looked amazing and one that was incredibly ambitious. It was one that fell into development hell for so long and technically was never truly finished. Final Fantasy 14 and its expansions and Titanfall 2, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, Monster Hunter World, Overwatch, The Witcher 3, Dark Souls 3, Battlefield 1, Nier Automata, Dishonored 2, Dragon Ball Z Fighters, of course, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, Doom, Dragon Quest XI, Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, and so much more made it on here. The 8th generation was one filled with so many experiences that are absolutely worth exploring. Good games are the best way to ensure that a system is successful, especially if they perform well. However, while the current hardware allowed for many games to look amazing while still running fine, there were still a far cry from what a PC could achieve, and competition did become a lot more interesting halfway through the generation. Naturally, Sony added to the interest behind their platform with multiple hardware revisions. In September of 2016, Sony launched the first significant revision of the PlayStation 4. This model is known as the PlayStation 4 Slim. This is a surprisingly thinner version of the original, although the original model was already very reasonably sized. And now this one goes ahead and steps it up a notch, and it does feel and look like a genuine Slim model, even if we could probably never reach the heights of the PS2 Slim days again. On the front, you will find the Blu-ray drive, power and eject buttons, and 2 USB A ports. On the back, you will find a power plug, dedicated port for the PlayStation camera, an HDMI port, and an Ethernet port. But you will also find a hard drive bay with multiple storage options available for purchase, including the base $500 model for $300, $100 cheaper than the original, and it does come with multiple improvements. The new Slim model comes with a quieter fan, making it the least noisy revision of them all, and it even features a faster and seemingly more reliable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. Alongside it, Sony introduced an updated version of the original DualShock 4 controller. Now it features gray buttons and analog sticks instead of the black ones of the original, and the lights are now visible on the trackpad itself, making the indicator lights easier to follow. Additionally, it has better battery life, higher quality rubber on the thumbsticks, and it's slightly lighter overall. These were welcome upgrades, but the Slim model, as per usual, is not a massive improvement over the original. It was already reliable, and the Slim model didn't really change that much from the original. The Slim model launched a month after Xbox had a much needed revision, that being the Xbox One S, and that one did feature more significant upgrades, including the ability to play 4K Blu-rays. But that exact same year, 2 months after the Slim model made it onto the market, they had another revision ready, and this one was going to be huge. The PlayStation 4 Pro was the first true performance upgrade we'd gotten out of any mid-generation refresh console, and it was a very big deal. This particular model looks like the PS4 Slim, just doubled in size from all dimensions. It is their biggest 8th gen console with a very similar matte black finish as the Slim model, but we received many special editions versions of the system, including this God of War one that I have here. On the front, you will find a power button, eject button, a Blu-ray player, and 2 USB-A ports. On the back, you will find a power connector, an HDMI port, a port for the PlayStation camera, an optical audio port, a USB-A port, and an Ethernet port. The hard drive bay is also on the rear, this time housing a 1TB drive by default. This model also comes with the new V2 DualShock 4 controller, which is a very nice addition. The PS4 Pro is a significant improvement in terms of performance from both the original and the Slim models, containing the same CPU as those other systems, but with a much more capable version of the same GPU. The Pro models have an AMD Radeon with 4.2 teraflops when compared to the originals and Slim's 1.84 teraflops. Of course, this performance bump came at the cost of power draw, with the Pro models maxing out at 310 watts and the original model at 165 watts. While the Pro model supports 4K video streaming, they still do not really support 4K Blu-ray playback, which is an advantage that Microsoft still retained. But now, the Pro models can support 4K HDR gaming content. In an era where games were built to run well at 1080p, 4K was becoming much more prominent. Now, 4K TVs had made it into so many homes at this point that it would have been quite foolish not to capitalize on this if possible. As such, many studios made enhanced versions of their games in order to take advantage of the extra firepower that the Pro models would provide. One of the games that took great advantage of this upgraded hardware is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. As on the Pro models, it runs at 4K with HDR active, which is quite impressive, and it really does look absolutely beautiful. Many games did get enhancements, including Devil May Cry 5, Elder Scrolls Online, and Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Now, these were some of the games that received the best enhancements, but not all games could actually run natively in 4K, while many had to be just upscaled through a variety of methods, including the checkerboarding method. A lot of enhanced versions of games were limited to just running at higher frame rates in 1080p or would only work in 4K, but without HDR and such, which did make the purchase of a whole new system not always worth it to people. There were still a surprising amount of games that received some kind of enhancements, which eventually made the purchase of a PS4 Pro look far more enticing. Overall, the PS4 Pro was really interesting, and even though Sony had a huge advantage around the start, pretty much just cemented their placement for the entire generation, the competition was gearing up in very unexpected ways. As we all know, Microsoft nearly doomed their system entirely, while Nintendo had such a difficult run that they went ahead and discontinued the Wii U just 4.5 years after it launched. The PS4 was pretty much uncontested, as even if you could play a bunch of third-party games on the Xbox One, they still performed better on the PS4, and Sony had so many exclusive titles on their system only, where Microsoft hadn't really procured nearly as many. At least, not as many impactful ones. Eventual hardware refreshes would help to keep things interesting, with the Xbox One S being the system that we should have gotten from the start. And this is when gamers started taking the Xbox One platform more seriously, but it was still struggling a lot. And then to help with these struggles, Microsoft added many more selling points to their platform, which include the ability to play older Xbox and Xbox 360 titles through backwards compatibility, which is something that the PS4 lacked entirely unless it was through their own PlayStation Store or other services. Additionally, gamers loved Game Pass, which was a very affordable way of playing new releases on day one, which is something that Sony didn't match all that well. Now, PlayStation Plus was a similar service, but it didn't have that same day one aspect that the Game Pass did, and it was mostly a way of just playing older titles. This helped Xbox, but PlayStation was still far ahead of them at this time. However, in 2017, Nintendo would return to shake things up with the Nintendo Switch, a hybrid system that would play games portably and at home without the need to stream them at all. Breath of the Wild was a huge game here, and becoming a launch title for the system, and essentially one of the very few games that would sell it for many months to come. But this was probably one of the most popular games at the time, period. So naturally, the demand for the Switch was insanely high and grew exponentially with the eventual downpour of titles with an overwhelming amount of third-party support. Meanwhile, Sony was going to discontinue the PlayStation Vita 2 years later, and Microsoft's only attempt at breaking into portable gaming was through xCloud on mobile and laptops. The Switch was an overwhelming force of tech, had it still continued just being its own product, had it had so many games that it became the preferred way for some to play these, including myself. I was okay with sacrificing a bit of the visuals just for the sake of taking games with me anywhere. But that exact same year that the Switch launched, the Xbox One X entered the scene to compete directly with the PS4 Pro. It is more powerful than the One S, but especially important to note that it is even more powerful than the PlayStation 4 Pro, which made enhanced titles look even better if they were available on both platforms. These two were the main competitors, but Sony had such a strong lead over Microsoft that even Phil Spencer himself, the head of Xbox, publicly acknowledged that there was no way that the Xbox One would even get close to how the PlayStation 4 is doing, stating that this was the worst generation to lose. Meanwhile, the Switch was selling incredibly well, but Sony still stood comfortably for the most part. Their fate had already been sealed, and it was just a matter of waiting for the final numbers to drop in. The 8th generation of gaming technically ended in 2020 when the successors launched. That's the exact same year that the Xbox One hardware was discontinued, but Sony still kept support the PS4 until 2022, hardware-wise at least. The PlayStation 4 was the system to restore a lot of the goodwill that had been lost during the 7th generation with the PS3, but I believed that the PS4 looked so exceptional mostly because the Wii U and the Xbox One were so underwhelming at the time. This competition should have been much closer. The many sins of the competition gave Sony the space that they needed to overcome the pains that preceded the PlayStation 4. Ultimately, Sony sold about 117 million PlayStation 4s, almost double of what the Xbox One achieved, and one that was surpassed by the Nintendo Switch just 1 month later in April of 2022. The PS4 was one of my favorite consoles ever, all thanks to the library of amazing titles that it possessed and one that still earned its spot after all is said and done. As mentioned earlier, Sony had been working on their next generation system for some time, and by the time it was ready, the world was hit with a very unprecedented pandemic that majorly impacted the 9th generation consoles for years. I probably won't be making a full mini documentary on its successor until this generation is over, but stay tuned and subscribe for many videos that will be coming out throughout the year, and of course, when the story of the 9th generation is finally over, I will be sure to cover it here. Now, thank you so much for watching. I'll leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries, and do consider pressing the hype button on this video in order to boost it in the algorithm, and sharing it also helps out a ton. Until next time.